Thanks, Lynn. So my part is going to be short because Cass is far more interesting. And I mean that honestly. I just wanted to start off with an idea and some thoughts and get you to think what comes into your mind when you hear the word dashboard. You know, if you want to type something or want to say something, go for it, or you can just think among yourselves. Because I think people have a lot of different ideas about what dashboards do, and they are versatile. But we think the key thing is presenting some sort of information that you can take an action on. And there's a variety of ways you could present dashboards. So, for instance, what do you think of this one? Do you like it? What do you like about it? Do you not like it? In that case, what don't you like about it? Is it easy to understand? Does it give you something you can take from it and go, yep, I know what to do with this? So that's one example of a dashboard. Oops, my mouse has stopped working. That's helpful. Oh, there we go. What about this one, which is showing basically on the left-hand side how many clicks students have on particular pieces of content, and on the right-hand side how many minutes they spent in particular pieces of content. Is this something you find interesting? Or again, is this something you just look at and think, no, it's horrific. I honestly can't stand it. Take it off the screen. Finally, what about this one? Showing grades. Each dot there is a student's grade, and that kind of bar plot you can see off to the right-hand side is showing you where most of the students lie. So most of the students are getting fairly good marks in this one. Does that tell you something interesting? There are slight differences between the different columns in Grade Centre, but again, this is showing you something else. So we've seen lots of things. We've seen, just with 3 dashboards, we've seen a kind of action dashboard with things that are green and red. We saw a kind of bubble plot trying to communicate information by size. And here we're trying to show information via a graph. So there's many ways to show data. And what I wanted to achieve with this is to tell you that we're here to help you understand your data. And we're here to present data in ways that you will understand. We may have suggestions, and you may not want those suggestions, and we can throw them out, but it comes down to what you want your data for. And if you've got particularly burning questions about I2 and how students are engaging, you may want to work with us to put together a graph or a dashboard for you so you can see what's going on. You may not know that there's a number of dashboards around the university. Obviously, I'm from the Division of Learning and Teaching, and you may know of the various QLT KPIs, things like subject outlines on time, assignments returned on time. There's various dashboards there for heads of school and faculty staff. There's various subject experience survey dashboards showing how students are rating their experience of subjects. SPI, Strategic Planning and Information, have a host of dashboards on things from progress rates to course enrolments to attrition rates to government surveys. If you haven't been to the SPI website, I really encourage you to go there. You'll find a lot of good information there. And we've started producing dashboards on Interact2 for a variety of audiences, Kath and her friends being one of them. What can we give you from Interact2? This isn't a comprehensive list, but this is just to get your mind thinking about, what do I want to know about my subject site? We can get information on students accessing the subject site. We can get information on students accessing particular pieces of content in the subject site. If there's a particular piece of content you think is critical, yet we find that only 5 students out of 50 have accessed it, what might that mean? We can give you information on when students are logging in, perhaps for you to work out when the best time to hold webinars is. We can give you information on student posts, blogs and journals, and that can be as simple as raw numbers how many posts does a student have, or we're now looking into getting into lexical analysis. So what words are students using the most? What sentiments are students, or staff for that matter, using the most? We're getting into that sort of thing. So if that's interesting to you about how forums or blogs and journals are used for things such as what sort of reading age are posts being written to, what are the key phrases that come up again, or what are the key sentiments? Are the key sentiments, I'm confused, I'm struggling, help me, or this is fantastic, I love this, more of this? And can also give you information on site design. So for example, are your folders very deep? Have you got content buried, hidden away, where it takes 20 clicks to get to? And don't think that's an exaggeration. I have seen a site where there were folders 20 deep. I'm sure they didn't intend to start off that way, but it just got there. Or is your site designed in a more flat structure? And what will work best for your situation? There's often no wrong answer in those situations. And this is me practically finished. I did take a bit longer than I thought. Sorry, Kath. And if there's anything you've got or any questions about what you'd like to see in Interact2, it doesn't have to be a dashboard. We're presenting a dashboard here because that fulfills a purpose. But even if it's just some analytics, shoot us off an email at that email address right there. It will come to us and we're more than happy to help with any questions you might have. And with that, I pass over to Kath.
Thank you, Ian. That was really lovely. And you didn't go over. You were just right on time. So I'm just going to share my desktop. And let me know when you see it.
Yes, we're seeing it.
Fabulous.
Thank you.
Excellent. So thank you very much for having me today. My goal is to speak in 10 minutes or less to tell you about the story of my care plan. So this is about lecturer in learning and teaching dashboard, which Ian collaborated with the other LLTs in my school to create. As highlighted by Ian already, there are various dashboards available to you. In my role, I often use the SES dashboard, the GLOW dashboard, as well as the LLT dashboard. While all these dashboards have their role, for this specific presentation today, I'm just going to focus on the LLT dashboard and as an example of how dashboards can assist in subject development. So my care plan. The first step in my care plan is the conversation starter. So the main thing the LLT dashboard helps with is what I like to call the conversation starter. The dashboard sets the tone of the initial contact with subject teaching teams, course directors, and subject coordinators. As I go through this layout in the first section of this presentation, I will also link that back to how these elements of the dashboard forms part of my conversation starter. So let's have a look at the lay of the land. So this is what you see when you first log in to the LLT dashboard. Ian Holder already talked about elements of what he can pull out of Interact2. So in consultation with him, we came up with this idea of an eagle's eye view of subjects viewed both on their own as well as across past sessions. It also gives us a specific tool that helps us look at several subjects delivered in the same session as part of a course enrollment pattern. As you can see, you're able to choose a single subject or a subject across several sessions, as well as a couple of subjects within a course. I'm just going to give you a warning here. While this dashboard allows you to choose every single subject, for example, in your whole course, there is a limit to the data that it can display. And so to play it safe and for the dashboard not to freeze on you, I normally only choose 2 subjects to compare, or I choose a subject between at least, well, the maximum of 3 sessions. The second tab on our dashboard gives me a feel of how many times students engage with Interact2 for this subject or the various subjects that I've chosen. And then I look at structure and content. So many times in my role, I don't actually get access to the subject sites until I make first contact with the subject convener and the subject teaching team. So this is a great way to get an eagle's eye view to initially gauge how to interact with the subject coordinators in terms of looking at how they actually design the subject. So what's the purpose of Interact2 in this subject? Is it a repository? Is it a jumping point? Or is it just the main platform for learning in this subject? So this helps sets the scene for me. Then I actually have a specific interest in discussion forums. So this is a specific tab I asked Ian to add into our dashboard. So depending on your discipline and cohort or delivery, such as online or on campus, discussion forums play different parts in your subjects. I find this fascinating because forums are always a good starting point for asynchronous interaction. And one of the easiest ways to engage students in a flexible, accessible way. In previous subject work I've been engaged in, the subject coordinator and I usually use the forum analysis to shape and develop forum activities. Quite recently, Ian actually introduced me to this additional tool where we've been able to pull out data from forums that I am currently working with or I've actually worked in the past. And I'm actually using this as conversation starters with those subject coordinators so it can inform their future subject design. So in this example, these are 3 different subjects where we have a subject coordinator who's a beginner, a subject coordinator who is a user, and a super user of forums. So the beginner, looking at the beginner, just as a background, his subject only had a few students. So you can see that there were only 6 students in this subject. And he had never used the forum before. And so before I actually grabbed this data, I had a conversation about teaching online, and maybe he should start using his discussion board in a more structured way, posting a reflective question each week rather than just having the main discussion forum. And as you can see, that while he is the center of the discussion, there is some evidence that the structure of the forum encouraged discussion between himself and his students. Now, so we hadn't seen this data before, and then I showed it to him after the session, and he was actually quite impressed. So he's actually now feeling more confident that it does present an opportunity to engage early with his students. So he's actually going to implement this in the next iteration of his next subjects. And if we look at the user, he's one who's used the forum before. He's used reflective questions before. But for this specific subject, I actually encouraged him to summarize or highlight key points that students were actually picking up during the session. So you can actually see that he had a lot of engagement in the discussion forum, but if you note up here, there were 2 students who appear to be just talking to themselves. So this was interesting data to him. So he actually realized that in his next iteration, as well as highlighting, he should actually be looking and scheduling time to look at the discussion forums and actually discover if students are talking to themselves and they need to be pulled in or, grab attention from other students to reply to them. So that was something that he learned from that. And finally, for the super user, which is on the right here, he was actually curious if his innovative strategies really worked in allowing his discussions to be led by students. So as you can see, there is evidence that this is happening with the teacher not at the center of the conversation. So these are just examples of how I'm actually bringing the dashboard into my conversations. And finally, there is the heat map tab. On the left, you have the heat map for student activity in Interact, where you can see when they access the subject most. And on the right, it actually looks at subject coordinator access time. So having my conversation starters, I now move to step 2 of the care plan, which is to advise and advocate. This means it's a triangulation of information, so drawing from various knowledge bases, wisdom of the subject teaching team, different projects happening across the university, such as the QLT KPIs, the OLM project, as well as uImagine projects. And what happens during the session? So the advice and advocate is now delivered to the subject coordinator during the session. It provides us an opportunity to optimize uptake of learning as the subject is being delivered. So the dashboard becomes a sort of benchmarking tool throughout the session. I check the dashboard to see any changes in student engagement, content, forums, general access to the site. In some cases, I've actually encouraged subject coordinators to engage their students in a mid-session student survey using the Google Forms as a way to collect that. And then we compare it to the dashboard. And most often, more often than not, it actually aligns with the results in the dashboard. And I'm happy to report back to the ALTS team that it gives the dashboard more credence. As an example, as Ian already kind of described earlier, I worked on this subject where we were finding that students were finding it difficult to find folders and files. After a quick review of the folder depth and number of clicks, we rehashed the content with the help of an ESC to minimize the clicking time. And if you see in the bottom right there, where previous access was 23 for the same folder, the most current session showed that students accessed the content 515 times, which was fabulous, which means there was less talk in the discussion forums about where am I finding these readings, and students actually actively finding the content. The R in my care plan stands for reflect and review. So this happens towards the end of the session. We go back to the dashboard, reflect and review what we experienced, what the dashboard captured, and we look at the current site activity against the activity in previous sessions. So this gives us a good benchmark as to whether we did things right this time around or we did worse, which sometimes does happen. And then we look at, we compare site access based on students and access ratio. And we also look at student patterns of activities during that week. Now, this is an interesting example. This is a subject where the online meeting was scheduled on Thursday evenings. You'll see that student accessed the site an hour before the online meeting. So they were accessing readings, creating forum posts. So during this delivery, so in the middle of this, I actually encouraged the subject coordinator to reply to forum posts the day before the scheduled online meeting. And we found that we got more engaged discussion during the online meeting. So students were actually quoting each other from the discussion board, which they had visited just before the online meeting, which I found was, a really, really good way to up the engagement in terms of meaningful discussion. And finally, the last step in my care plan is getting the subject team, teaching team, and subject coordinators to look at lessons learned. So the dashboard helps us visualize the patterns of successes and areas of improvement, especially failures. So if this was a part of a course review, these lessons would be captured and recorded and forwarded to the course director for review in terms of what needs to be done after the course review. And so that's my 10 minutes up, actually longer than that, but thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Kath. That was great. I really love the way that you are using the analytics to start conversations with academics to actually get them to reflect on what's been happening in their class and start thinking of different strategies to implement in the following year. I think what's quite powerful there is that you are now have 3 sessions or even for now 4 sessions of data with trends that you can actually be comparing, which is really powerful.
Oh, it's actually quite helpful as well in terms of getting understanding across of how their subjects are doing. And I really have to thank Ian because whilst you can look at these images and go, oh, they're very pretty and colorful, Ian actually directs me and says, but can you see the difference in clicks, and then I bring that information back to the subject teaching teams, and that's really helpful.
Yes, I think that's one of the comments I made in the chat earlier, was that I think we need to be taught, academics need to be taught how to read and interpret those sorts of visualizations. And so really I can see that Ian has been skilling you up in being able to actually read that data and interpret that in relevant ways. Okay, so look, I'd like to open up for any questions. We've got a good 5 minutes left. So, David, do you have any questions that you would like to ask of either Kath or Ian?
I think it's overwhelming. I mean, the problem is, driving 4 subjects, 2 of which might be online, 2 of which you just don't have time to go through all this stuff, I mean, this week has been interesting because there's lots of information hiding behind the back room, which there's obviously an army of people out there who are analysing this and sending the reports here, there and everywhere, not necessarily to me, but up the line who can then turn around and say, oh, you're not performing this or you're not doing that, because they've got all this data, but they never have any, because they're viewing the data and they're saying, oh, the students didn't engage and therefore it's your fault, therefore your content's no good. Well, that's not necessarily true. It's the fact that you're dealing with a human, right? And students are students, and just as we saw in that last example, which they all came in for Kath at the 7 o'clock when they're having their meeting at 8, or they came in at 6 for the meeting at 8, because, the 11th hour is when I can get in and I can get a tick in the box for getting my 10 points or whatever it may be. You find that what we're dealing with here is lots of data, which is all very useful, lots of data that has to be filtered and refiltered, and because it should go back to what the original objective was. That was, what are we trying to do here? And we basically find we have 2 problems. We have too much data and not enough time to interpret it, and the people who are interpreting it have a much better idea of the interpretation than the person who creates it, which is the turkeys like me, who have to try and convince those people out there in education land to come into the site or come into this. We see, if you look at the visitation, if we go back to, I think it was Monday or Tuesday, where we had all the retention discussion with Stuart was talking about with the red dots. Well, it's fine. We know they come in at week 11, if there's an online quiz coming or something coming up in week 13. We know they may come in at week 1, but we see this big hole in the system where they say, I'm not going to talk to the subject site for 6 or 7 weeks. Now, it's not through lack of content going on there, it's the lack of their decision, and this is perhaps more on the internal students than the external, but it's about them talking about saying, I don't see the need. And even though I don't know how many times you can tell them the same, give them the same message every week in a workshop. Don't forget to have a look at this, go and have a look at this lecture. We've recorded it, it's on CSU replay, and so forth and so on. But that motivation doesn't appear to be there, you know. And so we have good analytics, yeah, great stuff, telling us what's going on, telling us what they're not doing. But the thing it can never dive into is why they're not doing it in terms of their headspace, I reckon.
It's the connections too, though. I'd be interested to hear Kath's response to that, Kath, because you're obviously in your position. You're working with individual academics, just as David's described.
Okay, so I thought you had more to say. Okay, so David, completely understand that there is still a lot of probably areas that we're not connecting directly. But what I found with working with the subject coordinators in terms of bringing this data is probably not more of, it's not really focused on their individual performance, but really to actually give them an opportunity to see ways where they can ask students, why aren't you able to, why is this not happening, or is there a better way for us to cater to your needs in terms of your learning requirements or your learning style. So I've actually found that students, so the use of the Google the Google form as a mid-session feedback, and then responding to students' feedback, we found that we've been able to connect to the why of why certain subjects are designed in that way, or the content needs to be delivered, in various areas of the Interact2 site and so forth. So I guess, I mean, if I was in your school, I don't know which school you're at, David, but, I would love to be able to sit with you and you can explore these things and maybe try it out. That would be good.
Yeah, I'm in the School of Communication. That's.
Oh, okay. Well, I can visit you sometimes. I'm in the same faculty.
Oh, there you go. You most probably hide in Wagga or Canberra. Or
I'm in Adelaide, but that's okay.
There you go. That's all right. If you can ever get over to Bathurst, you can.
Absolutely, absolutely.
But I didn't know we had the campus in Adelaide. So there you are. That's something new.
I'm the VC in Adelaide. Just kidding. I'm kidding.
That's right. There you go. The other, I think, one of the analytics, does this drill down? We run with, particularly with internal and distance students, we actually run group work, which is always difficult but can we drill this stuff down into those particular groups, or are we stuck? I mean, can you say I've got group one and I've got 4 groups, and group 1 is more active than group 2? Can we drill into those, the student visitations to their group activity? Is that a possibility?
Is that on the forum, David?
No, in normally in the I2 site, in the subject site, you pull in users and groups, and you pull up a group out of the users, and then you assign them, file exchange and maybe a blog tool and another number of tools from the thing, and which you encourage them to use, which some do, some don't.
Yes, yeah.
And or they go off and have a Facebook site and do it all offline and don't invite you in.
I know, which is quite often the case, but you can, and I'm just wondering if Ian's still with us there. He doesn't appear to be, because I was just gonna. Oh, you are. Okay. Can you?
I'm not leaving you alone to say anything.
Okay. Yes. So just the group. So David was just interested because
you have done that. I recently, talking out of turn, did a review for the police on their second year course, and we looked how the various groups interacted on discussion forums. And and it was clear some groups were interacting and posting more than others, and how they went in blogs and journals and other things like that were at the I2 group level. We can look into those.
Okay.
And so have you got some graphics that capture some of the reporting that's been done?
I have to hunt it down, and I've actually got another webinar that I need to do.
Okay, we'll follow up on that,
I can
actually.
follow up with you, David, and give you some idea about the kind of things we've done, because we did a wholesale review of all the analytics. And just to go back to your point that there's so much of it and it's very confusing, I agree with you entirely, and I think Kath would as well. But we can always start off at one point. If groups is where your interest lies, let's just look at groups. Let's leave the rest for later. And do it when you're ready. We don't have to look at everything on that dashboard or everything at there. We can cherry pick. If we're feeling we're not quite comfortable with having a wholesale, we can do that. Sorry, I've just got to close that one down. Yeah, we're more than happy to do that. I'm a believer. Kath, I gave a lot of detail to because
I love photos.
She loves detail, she understands it, and she thrives on it.
There you go.
I was working with an academic at the first go. I wouldn't present back to them and say, here you go, see you later.
That's good advice. That's really good advice.